Pawn is a horror/thriller visual novel, although the way that it starts you wouldn't think that. Like most good stories of this nature, the beginning is very ordinary. You play a guy returning to his hometown after 10 years to act as a substitute teacher at a high school for a week, right at the end of the semester. You're introduced to a cast of characters that all have the usual anime-style tropes in full display. You have the quirky schoolgirl, you have this unbelievably horny guy who also happens to be a teacher, which is rather worrying, and then you have the stern teacher, and then you have this ditzy dreamy librarian, and so on. Then just as you're wondering when things are going to get interesting, they do. After half an hour or so of silly slice-of-life character comedy that's so cliché it's almost painful to sit through, you find out that your character is actually an undercover cop sent to the school to protect one of the students because there's been a swathe of mysterious kidnappings. It's not long before the game reveals its darker side and kidnappings graduate to murder, and the game turns into a tense situation where the killer always seems to be several moves ahead. While the game is mostly a straight visual novel, there are investigative elements where you can interrogate suspects and look around crime scenes. These types of scenes are very basic, but they were a nice surprise and were interesting enough to break up the bulk of the reading, and they do have an effect on how the game plays out. When interrogating suspects, you go through conversation options and then you pinpoint a weakness of theirs that you can use to extract more pertinent information. When looking around crime scenes, you pick out items of interest and then you choose which ones to send off for further examination, which again affects what information you later receive. It was an interesting story, very dark, almost surprisingly so, and some of the art feels unpolished, but the game doesn't shy away from showing things which are quite graphic, and that took me by surprise, so just be warned about that. While there were a few instances where anyone familiar with tropes of this world could see where things were going from a mile off, the journey was still absorbing enough. While playing Pawn, there are a few things that early on in the game put me off and then later were annoying quirks to get through. Things like music on very short loops which nearly drove me mad, typos and strange turns of phrase, certain scene transitions that felt really unnecessary, and awkward controls in the point and click sections. The typos and strange turns of phrase makes me think that the game could have done with a more thorough editor for the English language version at least, and as text is such an integral part of the visual novel experience, it always needs to be as perfect as it can be. As for scene transitions, and I don't know if this is an issue with Tyranno Builder, the visual novel software that the studio used, there was one instance that really grated on my nerves towards the end. It's where your character is having a one-on-one conversation with another character, and there's a 3 to 4 second fade between each character's image as they take their turn to speak. And it's incredibly frustrating when the conversation is supposed to flow, and especially so when you have to sit through a transition after each character says like one sentence. I'm not going to show it here because there's spoilers. My final point is not necessarily a problem, but it's worth noting that at the 3/4 stage of the game where you have to make your key choice that locks you into the endgame, getting the bad end reveals who the killer is, and so therefore, if you make the wrong choice, the reveal of the killer in the true ending isn't as dramatic as it could be, so that's just something to watch out for if you want the full drama. OD Bear Studios is a doujin group, a circle of amateur visual novel creators, and Pawn was their little indie project, so I'm inclined to be more forgiving. After all, the game is very enjoyable. Well, maybe enjoyable isn't the right word for a game that features such dark subject matter. What I mean to say is that this is a good visual novel, if a little rough around the edges, and I look forward to seeing what else the studio comes up with.